the woman who stumbled into the Silver Creek Saloon in Kingfisher, Oklahoma on that sweltering August afternoon in 1883, looked like she had ridden through hell itself, and Benjamin Everett knew trouble when he saw it walking through a door. Her dark hair hung in tangled waves down her back, her dress was covered in trail dust, and her green eyes held the kind of wild desperation that made grown men take a step back. But Benjamin found himself moving forward instead, drawn to her like a moth to flame despite every instinct telling him to stay put. She collapsed against the bar, her hands shaking as she reached for the water pitcher the bartender slid toward her, and Benjamin watched her drink like someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be satisfied. He had been nursing his whiskey in the corner, trying to decide whether to head back to his ranch or stay in town another night, but that decision seemed to make itself when she lifted those green eyes and met his gaze across the smoky room. "You look like you could use more than water," Benjamin said, moving to stand beside her at the bar. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sandy brown hair that fell across his forehead and blue eyes that had seen their share of hardship in his 26 years. His hands were calloused from working cattle, his face tanned from long days under the Oklahoma sun, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who knew his worth without needing to prove it. She turned to look at him properly, and he saw the way she assessed him in an instant, taking in his clean shirt, his worn but well-maintained boots, the gun belt slung low on his hips. "I need a horse more than I need conversation," she said, her voice hoarse from the dust. "You got one to sell?" "Depends on why you need it so badly," Benjamin replied, signaling the bartender for 2 whiskeys. "Woman doesn't ride into town looking like she's been chased by demons unless there's a story worth telling." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "Try me." For a long moment, she just stared at him, and Benjamin could see her weighing her options, trying to decide if he was someone she could trust or just another obstacle in her path. Finally, she picked up the whiskey he had ordered for her and downed it in one swift motion, wincing as it burned down her throat. "My name is Florence Lawson," she said quietly, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting someone to burst through it at any moment. "And I am running from the law." Benjamin felt his eyebrows rise, but he kept his expression neutral. He had expected many things, but not such a direct confession from a woman he had known for all of 3 minutes. "What did you do?" "Does it matter?" Florence asked, her jaw tightening. "The law says I am guilty, and that is all anyone cares about. So unless you are planning to turn me in for whatever reward they are offering, I suggest you step away and forget you ever saw me." Instead of moving away, Benjamin leaned against the bar and studied her more carefully. She was beautiful, he realized, though it was a wild kind of beauty that seemed at odds with the proper ladies who lived in Kingfisher. Her face was smudged with dirt, her full lips were chapped from the sun, and there was a small cut above her left eyebrow that had scabbed over, but beneath all that, he could see the strength in her features, the determination that kept her standing when most people would have given up. "I am not interested in rewards," Benjamin said finally, "but I am interested in the truth. You tell me what really happened, and I will decide whether you deserve my help or my contempt." Florence laughed again, and this time there was a hint of genuine amusement in the sound. "You have quite the opinion of yourself, Cowboy. What makes you think I want your help at all?" "Because you are alone, exhausted, and desperate," Benjamin said bluntly. "And because I can see in your eyes that whatever you did, it is eating you alive. Guilty people do not look the way you do. They look defiant or scared, but not haunted." She was quiet for so long that Benjamin thought she might just walk away, but then she sighed and her shoulders slumped forward, as if the weight of her secret was finally too much to bear alone. "I killed a man," she whispered. At least, that is what they say I did. His name was Robert Mackenzie, and he was a prominent banker in Texas. They found him dead in his office with a bullet in his chest, and I was the last person seen entering the building. Did you do it? Benjamin asked, his voice low and steady. No. The word came out fierce and certain. But I was there, and I had a reason to want him dead, so everyone assumed I was guilty. My father owed Mackenzie money, a debt he could never repay, and Mackenzie made it clear that he would take payment in other ways if my father could not produce the cash. Her cheeks flushed with anger and shame. He wanted me, said I could work off the debt by becoming his mistress, that he would cancel everything if I agreed to his terms. Benjamin felt rage coil in his gut, hot and vicious. He had known men like Mackenzie, men who thought money gave them the right to take whatever they wanted from people who could not fight back. So you went to confront him. I went to beg him for more time, Florence corrected. I thought if I could just explain that my father was ill, that we needed a few more months, he might show mercy. But when I arrived, he was already dead. I heard the shot as I was climbing the stairs, and I should have run then, but I was stupid. I went into the office to see what had happened, and that is when his secretary came in and found me standing over the body with blood on my hands from where I had checked for a pulse. Did you see anyone else? The real killer? Florence shook her head. There was a window open behind his desk, and I heard footsteps on the fire escape, but by the time I thought to look, whoever it was had disappeared. The secretary started screaming, and I panicked. I ran, and I have been running ever since. That was 3 weeks ago, and I know they have sent marshals after me. I saw wanted posters with my face on them in the last 2 towns I passed through. Benjamin was quiet, processing everything she had told him. He knew he should probably take her story with a grain of salt, that criminals often claimed innocence. But there was something in the way she spoke, in the raw honesty of her words, that made him believe her. More than that, he felt something stirring in his chest, something he had not felt in years, not since his own family had been torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. "Then we will run together," he said, the words coming out before he could think better of them. Florence stared at him like he had lost his mind. "What? You heard me." Benjamin straightened up and met her eyes with a level gaze. "If you are telling the truth, and I believe you are, then you need help. You cannot keep running alone forever. Eventually, they will catch you, and when they do, you will hang for a crime you did not commit. But if you have someone watching your back, someone who knows this territory and can help you stay ahead of the law, you might have a chance. Why would you do this?" Florence demanded, her voice rising slightly. "You do not know me. You have no reason to risk your life for a stranger, especially one who is wanted for murder." Benjamin thought about that for a moment, trying to find words for the feeling that had taken hold of him the moment she walked through that door. "My father was accused of stealing cattle when I was 15, he said finally. "He was innocent, but the rancher who accused him was powerful, and my father was just a hired hand with no money and no connections. They hanged him without a proper trial, without giving him a chance to prove his innocence. My mother died of grief 6 months later, and I have spent the last 11 years building a life out of the ashes of everything I lost. So when I see someone in your position, someone who is being crushed by a system that does not care about the truth, I cannot just walk away. I will not." Florence's eyes were shining with unshed tears, and Benjamin could see the moment she decided to trust him, the way her whole body seemed to soften with relief. "I do not know how to thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," Benjamin said with a slight smile. "We have a long road ahead of us, and I cannot promise we will make it out of this alive. But I can promise I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, and to find out who really killed Robert Mackenzie. They left Kingfisher that night under the cover of darkness, riding two of Benjamin's best horses west toward the open plains. Benjamin had gone back to his ranch to gather supplies and to leave instructions with his foreman, a grizzled old cowboy named Pete, who asked no questions when Benjamin told him he would be gone for a while. Florence waited at the edge of town, hidden in the shadows, and when Benjamin returned with a pack horse loaded with food, water, blankets, and ammunition, she looked at him with a mixture of gratitude and wonder that made his heart ache. They rode hard for the first few hours, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and anyone who might have recognized Florence in the saloon. The night was clear and warm, the stars spread out above them like diamonds scattered across black velvet, and the only sounds were the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the occasional cry of a coyote in the distance. "Where are we going?" Florence asked when they finally slowed to a walk, giving the horses a chance to rest. "There is a canyon about 20 miles west of here," Benjamin said. "It is remote, hard to find unless you know where to look, and it has water and good grazing. We can hole up there for a few days, let the horses recover, and figure out our next move." "You have done this before," Florence observed. It was not a question. Run from the law? No. But I have spent enough time tracking cattle rustlers and horse thieves to know how to disappear when I need to. Benjamin glanced over at her, taking in the determined set of her jaw and the way she sat in the saddle like she had been born to it. "You ride well." "My father taught me," Florence said, a note of sadness creeping into her voice. "He used to say that a woman who could handle a horse could handle just about anything life threw at her. I wish he could have handled his debts as well as he handled a saddle." "Is he still alive?" Florence nodded. "As far as I know. I left him a note before I ran, telling him to stay quiet and to claim he did not know where I had gone. I hope he listened." They rode in silence for a while after that, each lost in their own thoughts. Benjamin found himself stealing glances at Florence, watching the way the moonlight caught in her hair and cast shadows across her face. She was not like the women he had known in Kingfisher, the respectable daughters of ranchers and shopkeepers who wore their propriety like armor and measured their words carefully. Florence was raw and real, her emotions close to the surface, and there was something about that honesty that drew him in despite the danger it represented. By the time they reached the canyon, the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, streaks of pink and gold bleeding across the horizon. Benjamin led them down a narrow trail that switchbacked along the canyon wall, treacherous in the dim light, but he had ridden it enough times to know every twist and turn. At the bottom, they found a small clearing beside a stream that ran year-round, fed by springs deep in the earth. "We will camp here," Benjamin said, dismounting and reaching up to help Florence down. She hesitated for just a moment before placing her hands on his shoulders, and when he lifted her from the saddle, he was acutely aware of how light she felt, how perfectly she seemed to fit against him in that brief moment before her feet touched the ground. "Thank you," she said softly, stepping back and looking around the canyon with wide eyes. "This is beautiful." "It is safe," Benjamin corrected, though he could not help but agree with her assessment. The canyon walls rose up on either side, red rock striped with white and gold, and the stream burbled over smooth stones, creating a sound that was both soothing and constant. "No one comes out here except me, and even I only use it a few times a year when I am moving cattle through this area." They worked together to set up camp, unsaddling the horses and rubbing them down before turning them loose to graze and drink. Benjamin started a small fire while Florence unpacked the supplies, and soon they had coffee brewing and bacon sizzling in a pan. The smell made Benjamin's stomach growl, reminding him that he had not eaten since noon the previous day. "You are good at this," Florence said, watching him work. "Taking care of things, I mean. It must be nice to feel so competent all the time." Benjamin laughed. "I do not feel competent. I feel like I am making this up as I go and hoping I do not get us both killed." "Well, you hide it well." Florence accepted the plate of bacon and beans he handed her and took a bite, closing her eyes with pleasure. "God, this tastes good. I have been living on hardtack and jerky for days." They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward, Benjamin showed Florence where she could wash up in the stream while he cleaned the dishes and checked on the horses. When she returned, her face was clean and her hair was damp, and she looked younger somehow, less like a woman on the run and more like the girl she might have been if life had been kinder. "You should get some rest," Benjamin said, spreading out blankets on the ground near the fire. "I will keep watch for a few hours, and then we can switch." Florence looked like she wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out, and she nodded, curling up on one of the blankets and pulling another over herself. Benjamin sat with his back against a rock, his rifle across his knees, and watched her sleep. Her face relaxed in slumber, the worry lines smoothing out, and he found himself wondering what it would be like to see her smile, really smile, without the weight of fear pressing down on her. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the canyon and chasing away the cool of the night. Benjamin let Florence sleep, knowing she needed the rest, and occupied himself with checking their supplies and making a mental list of what they would need to do next. He knew they could not stay in the canyon forever, but he also knew they needed a plan. A strategy for clearing Florence's name that went beyond simply running and hoping the law gave up. When Florence finally woke, it was early afternoon and she sat up with a startled gasp, looking around wildly before her eyes found Benjamin and she relaxed. "Why did you let me sleep so long?" "Because you needed it," Benjamin said simply. "And because we are safe here for now." Florence stood up and stretched, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. "So what do we do now? We cannot hide in this canyon forever." "No, we cannot," Benjamin agreed. "But we can use this time to think. You said the real killer escaped out the window. That means someone else had a reason to want Mackenzie dead, someone with access to his office. If we can figure out who that person is, we might be able to prove your innocence." "How are we supposed to do that from out here?" Florence asked, gesturing at the empty canyon around them. "We start by making a list of everyone who might have wanted Mackenzie dead," Benjamin said. "You knew him, at least a little. Did he have enemies? Business rivals? A wife or mistress who might have been angry with him?" Florence thought about it, her brow furrowing with concentration. "He was married, but I never met his wife. I heard rumors that she was much younger than him, that it was an arranged marriage of some kind, and he had business partners, other bankers and investors. I remember my father mentioning a man named James Thorne who had a falling out with Mackenzie over some land deal that went bad." "That is a start," Benjamin said, pulling out a small notebook and pencil from his saddlebag. "What else?" They spent the rest of the afternoon going over everything Florence could remember about Robert Mackenzie, about the people he associated with, and the business he conducted. It was not much, but it was something, and Benjamin felt a small spark of hope that they might actually be able to untangle this mess. As the sun began to set, painting the canyon walls in shades of orange and red, Benjamin built up the fire and started preparing dinner. Florence helped, and they fell into an easy rhythm, moving around each other like they had been doing this for years instead of just one day. "Can I ask you something?" Florence said as they sat down to eat. "Anything," Benjamin replied. "Why are you not married?" She flushed slightly, as if embarrassed by her own boldness. "I mean, You are handsome and clearly capable, and you own a ranch. I would think women would be lining up for a chance to be your wife." Benjamin smiled, but there was sadness in it. "I was engaged once when I was 22. Her name was Catherine, and she was the daughter of a shopkeeper in town. We were going to get married in the spring, build a house on my land, have a family. But then she met a traveling salesman who promised her a life in the city, fine dresses, and fancy parties, and she realized that being a rancher's wife was not what she wanted after all. She left without even saying goodbye." "I am sorry," Florence said softly. "That must have hurt." "It did," Benjamin admitted. "But I think I was more angry than heartbroken, if I am being honest. I realized that I had been in love with the idea of her, of building a life together, but I did not really know her. She wanted things I could never give her, and I wanted things she could never be. So maybe it was for the best that she left before we made a mistake we would both regret." "And since then?" Florence asked. No one serious," Benjamin said. "I have kept to myself, focused on building the ranch into something successful. It is easier that way, less complicated." "Lonely, though," Florence observed. "Sometimes," Benjamin agreed, meeting her eyes across the fire. "But I think maybe I was waiting for someone worth the complication." The air between them seemed to shift, charged with something unspoken but undeniable. Florence looked away first, her cheeks flushed, and Benjamin let the moment pass, not wanting to push her when she was already dealing with so much. They talked late into the night, sharing stories about their lives, their hopes and fears and regrets. Benjamin learned that Florence had wanted to be a teacher, that she loved books and poetry and the sound of rain on a tin roof. Florence learned that Benjamin had a younger sister who had moved to California with her husband, that he missed her terribly, but was proud of the life she had built, that his favorite time of day was early morning when the world was still quiet and full of possibility. By the time they finally settled down to sleep, Benjamin felt like he had known Florence for years instead of hours. He took the first watch again, sitting by the fire and listening to the sounds of the canyon, and when he finally woke Florence to take her turn, he fell asleep almost instantly, comforted by the knowledge that she was there, keeping him safe the way he was keeping her safe. They stayed in the canyon for 3 more days, resting and planning and growing closer with each passing hour. Benjamin taught Florence how to shoot his rifle, how to read the signs of the land and find water and shelter. Florence told him more about her life in Texas, about her mother who had died when she was young and her father who had tried his best, but had always struggled with money and responsibility. On the 4th day, they packed up their camp and headed south toward the small town of Red Rock, Texas, where Robert Mackenzie had lived and died. It was a risk going back, but Benjamin was convinced that the answers they needed were there, hidden among the people who had known Mackenzie best. The ride took them 5 days, through rolling plains and dry creek beds, past abandoned homesteads and herds of wild mustangs. They kept to the less traveled paths, avoiding towns and other riders, and at night they camped under the stars, their bedrolls close together for warmth and comfort. It was during those nights that Benjamin felt the shift between them, the way Florence would reach for his hand in the darkness, the way he would wake to find her curled against his side, seeking the security of his presence. They did not speak of it, did not put words to the feelings that were growing between them, but Benjamin knew that something profound was happening, something that scared him as much as it thrilled him. When they finally reached the outskirts of Red Rock, they made camp in a grove of cottonwood trees near a dry wash and discussed their strategy. Benjamin would go into town alone, posing as a cattle buyer interested in learning more about the local business opportunities. He would ask questions carefully, feeling out the situation and trying to find someone who might be willing to talk about Robert Mackenzie and his death. "I do not like this," Florence said, her hands twisting in her lap. "What if someone recognizes you from Kingfisher? What if they connect you to me?" "They will not," Benjamin assured her. "I was careful in Kingfisher and no one saw us leave together. As far as anyone knows, you are just a woman passing through who disappeared into the night." "Still," Florence said, her voice small and worried, "be careful." "I will," Benjamin promised. He reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I am not going to let anything happen to either of us. We are going to figure this out, and then we are going to build a life where you do not have to be afraid anymore." Florence looked at him with such hope and trust that it made his chest ache. "You really believe that, Don, not you?" "I do," Benjamin said, "because the alternative is unacceptable." He rode into Red Rock the next morning, leaving Florence hidden at the camp with strict instructions to stay out of sight and to run if anyone came looking. The town was bigger than Kingfisher, more prosperous, with wide streets and well-maintained buildings. The bank where Mackenzie had worked stood in the center of town, an imposing structure of brick and stone that seemed to loom over everything else. Benjamin tied his horse outside a saloon and went inside, ordering a whiskey and striking up a conversation with the bartender, a heavy-set man with thinning hair and a friendly manner. He introduced himself as Benjamin Ellis, a rancher from Oklahoma looking to expand his operation, and asked about the local cattle market. The bartender was happy to talk, and soon Benjamin had steered the conversation toward local businesses and the men who ran them. "I heard there was a bank here with good rates on loans," he said casually. "Mackenzie something," the bartender's expression darkened. "There was. Robert Mackenzie owned the First National Bank, but he was murdered a few weeks back. Terrible business, that. They say a woman did it, some girl whose father owed him money. She ran before they could arrest her properly." "Did they catch her?" Benjamin asked, keeping his tone neutral. "Not yet, but they will," the bartender said confidently. "There is a $500 reward for information leading to her capture. The marshals have been searching all over Texas and Oklahoma." $500, Benjamin repeated, whistling low. Someone must have really wanted her caught. Was Mackenzie well liked? The bartender hesitated, glancing around the nearly empty saloon before leaning in closer. "Between you and me, no, he was not. Mackenzie was a hard man, and he had a reputation for being ruthless with people who could not pay their debts. But he was rich and powerful, so people kept their mouths shut. His death, though, that stirred things up. Some folks think the girl did it, but others are not so sure." "Why is that?" Benjamin asked, his pulse quickening. "Because there were other people who had reason to want him dead," the bartender said quietly. "His business partner, James Thorne, for one. They had a big falling out right before Mackenzie died. Something about Thorne wanting to invest in the railroad and Mackenzie refusing to put up the bank's money. And then there is Mackenzie's wife, Margaret. She is young and beautiful, and there were rumors that she was not happy in the marriage, that she had taken up with someone else." "Who?" Benjamin pressed. The bartender shrugged. "No one knows for sure, but people talk. They say she was seen coming and going from Thorne's house at odd hours, that maybe the two of them were working together. But like I said, it is just talk. The law decided the Lawson girl was guilty, and that is the end of it as far as they are concerned." Benjamin finished his whiskey and paid for another round, using the time to think through what he had just learned. James Thorne and Margaret Mackenzie, both with motive and possibly opportunity. If he could find evidence linking either of them to the murder, he might be able to clear Florence's name. He spent the rest of the day in town, asking questions and gathering information. He learned that James Thorne lived in a large house on the edge of town, that he was still running his businesses, and seemed unaffected by Mackenzie's death. He learned that Margaret Mackenzie had gone into mourning and was rarely seen in public, though some said her grief seemed more performative than genuine. By the time Benjamin rode back to the camp, the sun was setting and he was exhausted but hopeful. Florence was waiting for him, pacing back and forth near the fire, and when she saw him, she ran forward and threw her arms around his neck. "Thank God," she breathed. "I was so worried." Benjamin held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair and feeling the warmth of her body against his. "I am fine," he murmured. "And I found something. 2 people who might have wanted Mackenzie dead, people with better motives than you." They sat by the fire and Benjamin told her everything he had learned. Florence listened intently, her eyes bright with hope. "So what do we do now?" she asked when he finished. "We need proof," Benjamin said. "Something that ties either Thorne or Margaret Mackenzie to the murder. I was thinking we could break into Thorne's office, see if there is anything there that might help us." "That is risky," Florence said, but there was determination in her voice. "But I suppose we do not have much choice." "When?" "Tonight," Benjamin decided. "The longer we wait, the more danger we are in. If someone recognizes you or starts asking questions about me, we could lose our chance." They waited until well after midnight, when the town was quiet and dark. They rode in together this time, Florence dressed in men's clothes that Benjamin had bought in town, her hair tucked up under a hat. They left the horses tied in an alley behind Thorne's office and approached the building from the rear. The lock on the back door was old and simple, and Benjamin had it open in less than a minute, using a piece of wire and a small knife. They slipped inside, Florence carrying a shuttered lantern that cast just enough light for them to see where they were going. Thorne's office was on the 2nd floor, a large room with a massive desk and filing cabinets lining the walls. Benjamin went straight to the desk while Florence started going through the cabinets, both of them working quickly and quietly. "What are we looking for exactly?" Florence whispered. "Anything that mentions Mackenzie or the bank," Benjamin replied. "Letters, contracts, financial records. Something that shows Thorne had a reason to want him dead." They searched for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes. Benjamin was beginning to think they would not find anything when Florence made a soft sound of triumph. "Look at this," she said, holding up a sheaf of papers. Benjamin took them and tilted the lantern to read. They were letters, correspondence between Thorne and someone named David Winters, discussing a plan to force Mackenzie out of the bank by sabotaging his investments and ruining his reputation. The letters were dated from several months before the murder, and the last one, dated just a week before Mackenzie's death, was particularly damning. "Mackenzie is refusing to see reason," Thorne had written. "If he continues to stand in our way, more drastic measures may be necessary. I have someone in mind who can handle the situation discreetly." "This is it," Benjamin said, his heart pounding. "This proves Thorne was planning something against Mackenzie. If we can find this David Winters and get him to testify, we might be able to clear your name." They took the letters and several other documents that seemed relevant, carefully replacing everything else so Thorne would not immediately realize he had been robbed. They were almost to the door when they heard footsteps on the stairs outside. "Hide," Benjamin hissed, pushing Florence toward a closet in the corner. They squeezed inside just as the office door opened and lamplight flooded the room. Through the crack in the closet door, Benjamin could see James Thorne enter the office, followed by a woman. She was young and strikingly beautiful, with dark hair piled on top of her head and a dress that was far too elegant for a midnight meeting in a dusty office. "Are you certain no one saw you leave?" Thorne asked, his voice tense. "I am certain," the woman replied, and Benjamin recognized her from descriptions he had heard in town. "Margaret Mackenzie. The servants are asleep, and I told them I was retiring early with a headache." "Good," Thorne said, moving to his desk. "We need to be more careful, Margaret. People are starting to talk, and the last thing we need is for someone to connect us to Robert's death." "No one will," Margaret said confidently. "That foolish Lawson girl took the blame perfectly. By the time anyone realizes she is innocent, we will be long gone with all of Robert's money." Benjamin felt Florence stiffen beside him, her breath coming faster. He put a hand on her arm, squeezing gently to remind her to stay quiet. "I still think we should have waited longer before starting to liquidate his assets," Thorne said. "The timing looks suspicious." "The timing is perfect," Margaret countered. "I am the grieving widow, and everyone expects me to need money to maintain the household. No one questions a woman in mourning." They talked for a few more minutes, discussing their plans to transfer funds and eventually leave Texas for California. Benjamin listened carefully, committing every word to memory, and when they finally left, closing the office door behind them, he waited a full 5 minutes before pushing the closet door open. "Did you hear that?" Florence whispered, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and relief. "They did it. They killed Mackenzie and framed me for it." "I heard it," Benjamin confirmed. "And now we have proof. Those letters, combined with their confession, should be enough to clear your name." "But how do we prove what they just said?" Florence asked. "It is our word against theirs, and they have money and influence." Benjamin thought about it, his mind racing. "We need to get them to confess again, but this time in front of witnesses. The marshal or a judge, someone who cannot ignore the evidence." They left Thorne's office and made their way back to the horses, riding hard for the camp. Once there, they spent the rest of the night planning their next move. Benjamin knew they needed help, someone in town who had authority and who might be willing to listen to their story. The next morning, he rode back into Red Rock and went straight to the marshal's office. The marshal was a grizzled old lawman named Tom Brady, and he listened to Benjamin's story with growing interest, though Benjamin could see the skepticism in his eyes. "That is quite a tale," Brady said when Benjamin finished. "But you are asking me to believe that James Thorne and Margaret Mackenzie conspired to murder one of the wealthiest men in Texas and frame an innocent girl. Do you have any proof?" Benjamin handed over the letters they had taken from Thorne's office. Brady read them slowly, his expression growing darker with each page. "These are damning," he admitted, "but they do not prove murder, just that Thorne was angry with Mackenzie and wanted him out of the way." "What if I could get them to confess?" Benjamin asked. "In front of you in a way that leaves no doubt." Brady studied him for a long moment. "How would you do that?" Benjamin explained his plan, and after some hesitation, Brady agreed. They spent the rest of the day making preparations, and by evening, everything was in place. Benjamin went to Thorne's house and knocked on the door, introducing himself as a lawyer representing Florence Lawson. He said that Florence was willing to turn herself in and plead guilty to a lesser charge in exchange for information about Thorne's business dealings with Mackenzie. Thorne's face went pale, and he invited Benjamin inside, leading him to a study where Margaret Mackenzie was already waiting. Benjamin pretended not to recognize her, and Thorne introduced her as a family friend who had taken an interest in the case. "What exactly is Miss Lawson claiming?" Thorne asked, trying to sound casual but failing. "She says that you and Mackenzie had a falling out over a railroad investment," Benjamin said, watching their reactions carefully. "She says that you threatened him, that you told her father you would do whatever was necessary to get Mackenzie out of the way." "That is ridiculous," Thorne blustered. The girl is lying to save her own skin." "Is she?" Benjamin asked. "Because I have letters that suggest otherwise. Letters that talk about taking drastic measures and hiring someone to handle the situation discreetly." Margaret and Thorne exchanged a panicked look, and Benjamin knew he had them. "Those letters were stolen," Thorne said angrily. "You broke into my office." "Perhaps," Benjamin said, "but that does not make them any less real. And I imagine a jury would be very interested in reading them, do not you think?" "What do you want?" Margaret demanded, her composure cracking. "Money. We can pay you to keep quiet." "I want the truth," Benjamin said. "I want you to admit that you killed Robert Mackenzie and framed Florence Lawson for his murder." "We will do no such thing," Thorne said, but his voice was shaking. "Then I will take these letters to the marshal and let him decide what to do with them," Benjamin said, standing up and moving toward the door. "Wait," Margaret said desperately. "Please. If you go to the marshal, we will hang. Just tell us what you want and we will give it to you." "I told you what I want," Benjamin said. "The truth." Margaret looked at Thorne, and something unspoken passed between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We did it. We killed Robert. He was a terrible man, cruel and controlling, and he refused to let James invest in opportunities that would have made us all rich. So we planned it together. James went to the bank early that morning and shot Robert, then escaped down the fire escape. When that stupid girl showed up looking for mercy, it was perfect. She took the blame and we were free." "Why?" Benjamin asked, though he already knew the answer. "Why not just divorce him?" Margaret laughed bitterly. "Because divorce would have left me with nothing. Robert made sure of that. But as his widow, I inherited everything. The bank, the house, all of his investments. James and I can finally be together, and we have the money to live the life we deserve." "The life you deserve," Benjamin repeated, shaking his head in disgust. "You destroyed an innocent woman's life so you could have money and each other." "She is poor and nobody," Margaret said coldly. "No one will miss her." "I will," Benjamin said, "and so will the marshal." Thorne and Margaret froze as Marshal Brady stepped out from behind a curtain where he had been hiding, listening to every word. "James Thorne, Margaret Mackenzie, you are both under arrest for the murder of Robert Mackenzie," Brady said, his voice hard and unforgiving. The next few hours were a blur of activity. Brady arrested Thorne and Margaret, taking them to the jail while Benjamin went to fetch Florence from the camp. She was waiting anxiously, and when he told her what had happened, she burst into tears of relief. "It is over," she sobbed, clinging to him. "It is really over." "It is," Benjamin confirmed, holding her tight. "You are free, Florence. You can go home now, back to your father, back to your life." But even as he said the words, Benjamin felt his heart sinking. He had promised to help Florence clear her name, and he had done that. But the thought of saying goodbye to her, of watching her ride away and never seeing her again, was unbearable. Florence pulled back and looked up at him, her green eyes shining with tears. "What if I do not want to go back?" she asked softly. "What if I want to stay with you?" Benjamin stared at her, afraid to hope. "Florence, you do not have to feel obligated to me just because I helped you. You are free now. You can do whatever you want." "I know," Florence said, "and what I want is to be with you." "These past weeks, riding together, planning together, I have felt more alive than I ever have before. You make me brave, Benjamin. You make me feel like I can be more than just someone's daughter or someone's burden. With you, I feel like I can be myself." "I love you," Benjamin said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I think I have loved you since the moment you walked into that saloon and told me you were running from the law. You are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and if you want to stay with me, then I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret that decision." Florence smiled, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. "I love you too," she said. "And yes, I want to stay. I want to build a life with you on your ranch in Oklahoma. I want to wake up every morning knowing that I am safe and loved and home." Benjamin kissed her then, a deep, passionate kiss that spoke of all the fear and hope and longing that had been building between them since the day they met. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Florence laughed, a sound of pure joy that made Benjamin's heart soar. They rode back into Red Rock together, and Florence gave her statement to Marshal Brady, confirming everything that had happened. Brady assured her that all charges against her would be dropped, that Thorne and Margaret would stand trial for murder, and that she was free to go wherever she wanted. "Thank you," Florence told Brady, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for believing me." "Thank Benjamin," Brady said gruffly. "He is the one who risked his neck to prove your innocence. You have got yourself a good man there, Miss Lawson." "I know," Florence said, smiling at Benjamin. "And I intend to keep him." They stayed in Red Rock for another week, long enough to see Thorne and Margaret formally charged and to watch the town's reaction as the truth came out. There was shock and outrage, but also a sense of vindication, especially among the people who had known and feared Robert Mackenzie. Florence was welcomed back with open arms, her name cleared and her reputation restored. On their last day in town, Florence went to visit her father, who had traveled from his home in another part of Texas when he heard the news. The reunion was emotional, both of them crying and holding each other close. Florence introduced Benjamin, and her father shook his hand with tears in his eyes. "Thank you for saving my daughter," he said. "I do not know how I can ever repay you." "Love her," Benjamin said simply. "That is all the payment I need." Florence's father gave his blessing for them to marry, and they were wed 2 days later in a small ceremony at the church in Red Rock. Florence wore a simple dress of pale blue, and Benjamin wore his best suit, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Benjamin felt like the luckiest man alive. They left Red Rock the next morning, riding back toward Kingfisher and the ranch that would be their home. The journey took them a week, and they traveled slowly, stopping often to rest and to enjoy the landscape and each other's company. They talked about their plans for the future, about the children they wanted to have, and the life they would build together. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Pete and the other hands were waiting to greet them, and there was a celebration that lasted well into the night. Florence was welcomed warmly, and Benjamin could see her relaxing, letting go of the last of her fear and tension as she realized that this was truly her home now, that she was safe and loved and surrounded by people who cared about her. Over the next few months, Florence settled into ranch life with an ease that surprised even Benjamin. She learned to cook over an open fire, to mend fences and tend to sick animals. She started a small garden near the house, planting vegetables and flowers, and she spent her evenings reading to Benjamin from the books she had brought with her from Texas. Benjamin found himself falling more in love with her every day. He loved the way she laughed at his terrible jokes, the way she sang while she worked, the way she curled up against him at night and whispered her dreams into the darkness. She made the ranch feel like a home instead of just a place to work, and he could not imagine his life without her. In the spring of 1884, Florence told him she was pregnant. Benjamin was overjoyed, and he spent the next several months preparing for the baby's arrival, building a cradle and adding a room onto the house, and driving Florence crazy with his constant worrying. Their son was born on a warm June evening, a healthy, squalling baby boy with Benjamin's blue eyes and Florence's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Benjamin's father, and from the moment Benjamin held him, he knew that his life was complete. Florence was a wonderful mother, patient and loving and endlessly creative in the ways she entertained and taught their son. Benjamin loved watching her with Thomas, loved the way her face lit up when the baby smiled or laughed, loved the gentle way she rocked him to sleep at night while humming lullabies. 2 years later, they had a daughter, a beautiful little girl with green eyes and a stubborn streak that reminded Benjamin of Florence. They named her Sarah, and she became the darling of the ranch, with every cowhand wrapped around her tiny finger. The years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. Benjamin's ranch prospered, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the territory. Florence started teaching the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders, fulfilling her old dream of becoming a teacher. She set up a small schoolhouse on the ranch, and soon there were a dozen children coming every day to learn reading and arithmetic and history. Benjamin watched her with pride, marveling at how far they had both come from that first desperate meeting in the saloon. The woman who had stumbled in covered in dust and running from the law had become the center of his world, the heart of their home, and he thanked God every day for bringing her into his life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Benjamin took Florence on a trip back to Red Rock. They visited her father, who was now living in a small cottage on the edge of town, his health better and his spirits high thanks to Florence's regular letters and visits. They also visited the graves of Robert Mackenzie, and while Florence did not mourn the man, she said a prayer for his soul and for the pain he had caused so many people. James Thorne and Margaret Mackenzie had both been hanged for murder, their executions attended by a large crowd that included many of Mackenzie's former victims. Florence had not attended, saying she did not want vengeance, only peace, and Benjamin had respected her decision. As they stood in the cemetery, Florence leaned against Benjamin and sighed contentedly. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if I had not walked into that saloon?" she asked. "All the time," Benjamin admitted, "but I cannot imagine it any other way. You are my life, Florence. You and our children, our ranch, the future we are building together. Everything I have, everything I am, I owe to that moment when you trusted me enough to tell me the truth." "I was so scared," Florence said softly. "I thought my life was over, that I would spend the rest of my days running and hiding and looking over my shoulder. But you gave me hope. You gave me a reason to fight, and you stood by me even when it was dangerous and foolish. I do not know how I got so lucky." "We both got lucky," Benjamin said, kissing the top of her head. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you never forget how much I love you." They returned to the ranch, to their children and their home and the life they had built together. Thomas was 8 now, tall and strong like his father, already learning to work cattle and care for horses. Sarah was 6, bright and curious, always asking questions and exploring every corner of the ranch. Florence was pregnant again, this time with twins, and while Benjamin worried about her constantly, she assured him that she was fine, that carrying his children was a joy, not a burden. The twins, both boys, were born in the fall of 1894, and they named them Daniel and Matthew. The ranch house was filled with noise and laughter and the constant chaos of 4 young children, and Benjamin had never been happier. He and Florence would sit on the porch in the evenings after the children were in bed, holding hands and watching the sun set over the Oklahoma plains, and he would marvel at how a chance encounter in a dusty saloon had led to this beautiful, messy, perfect life. Years continued to pass, and their children grew. Thomas took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, proving himself to be as capable and hardworking as his father. Sarah married a young lawyer from Kingfisher, a kind and intelligent man who adored her, and they built a house in town and started their own family. Daniel and Matthew went to college, something Benjamin and Florence insisted on, and they both came back to help expand the ranch into new ventures, including breeding horses for the cavalry. Florence continued teaching until she was well into her 60s, touching the lives of hundreds of children over the years. The schoolhouse she had started became a permanent fixture of the community, and when she finally retired, the townspeople threw her a celebration that lasted 3 days and brought people from all over the territory to honor her contributions. Benjamin and Florence grew old together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, but their love never dimmed. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other good morning and good night, still talked for hours about everything and nothing. They had weathered storms and droughts, the death of friends and the birth of grandchildren, and through it all, they had remained partners in every sense of the word. On the morning of Benjamin's 75th birthday, Florence woke him with a kiss and a smile. "Happy birthday, old man," she teased. "Old," Benjamin protested, pulling her down for another kiss. "I will have you know I am in the prime of my life." Florence laughed, the same joyful sound he had fallen in love with all those years ago. "Of course you are, my love. Now get up. Your children and grandchildren will be arriving soon, and we have a party to prepare for." The celebration was everything Benjamin could have wanted, surrounded by family and friends, by the people who had become his community and his legacy. As he looked around at the faces of his children and grandchildren, at Florence standing beside him with her hand in his, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life he had been given. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, Benjamin and Florence sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the cool autumn air. The stars were bright overhead and the land stretched out before them, familiar and beloved. "You have any regrets?" Florence asked, her voice soft in the darkness. Benjamin thought about it for a long moment. "Only one," he said finally. Florence turned to look at him, concern in her eyes. "What is it?" "I regret that I did not meet you sooner," Benjamin said with a smile. "That we did not have even more years together than we did. But I suppose that is greedy of me, is not it? We have had a good life, Florence, a wonderful life, and I would not change a single moment of it." Florence smiled and rested her head on his shoulder. "Neither would I," she whispered. "You saved me, Benjamin. You saved my life and gave me everything I never knew I wanted. I love you so much." "I love you too," Benjamin replied, kissing the top of her head. "Always and forever." They sat there together, two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had built something beautiful out of the ashes of fear and injustice. Their story had begun with a desperate confession and a cowboy's impulsive promise, but it had become so much more than that. It had become a legacy of love and courage, of standing by each other through every challenge and celebrating every joy. Benjamin and Florence lived for many more years, watching their family grow and thrive. They saw their grandchildren get married and have children of their own. They saw the ranch expand and prosper, becoming one of the most respected operations in Oklahoma. And through it all, they remained devoted to each other, a testament to the power of love to transform and redeem. When Florence passed away at the age of 82, surrounded by her family and holding Benjamin's hand, she went peacefully, a smile on her lips and no fear in her eyes. Benjamin grieved deeply, but found comfort in the knowledge that they had had a lifetime together, that they had loved each other completely and without reservation. He lived for 3 more years after Florence's death, spending his days working on the ranch and his evenings telling stories about his beloved wife to anyone who would listen. He talked about the day she had walked into that saloon, about the adventure they had shared clearing her name, about the life they had built together on the Oklahoma plains. He wanted everyone to know how special she had been, how brave and strong and loving, and how she had changed his life in ways he could never fully express. On a crisp spring morning, Benjamin passed away in his sleep, his body finally giving out after 85 years of hard work and good living. His children buried him next to Florence on a hill overlooking the ranch, and at the funeral, Thomas told the story his father had told so many times before, about a woman running from the law and the cowboy who had promised to run with her. It was a story of love and courage, of two people who had refused to let injustice win, who had fought for each other, and for the life they wanted to build together. It was a story that would be passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin in the most unexpected ways, with a desperate confession and a promise that changes everything. The ranch continued to thrive under the stewardship of Benjamin and Florence's descendants, each generation adding their own chapter to the family legacy. But they all remembered the story of how it began, with a woman covered in dust and fear and a cowboy who looked at her and saw not a criminal, but a person worth saving, worth loving, worth spending a lifetime with. And in that small cemetery on the hill, two simple headstones stood side by side, marking the resting place of Benjamin Everett and Florence Lawson Everett, beloved husband and wife, parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. The inscriptions were simple, just their names and dates, but visitors to the ranch would often stop there to pay their respects, drawn by the story of two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and had created something beautiful and lasting. Their love had started with a confession and a promise, with "I am running from the law and then we will run together." But it had grown into so much more, becoming a foundation for a family, a community, a legacy that would endure for generations. It was proof that love could triumph over injustice, that courage could overcome fear, and that sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on someone who seems like they might be trouble. Benjamin and Florence's story was one for the ages, a tale of the Wild West that spoke not of gunfights and outlaws, but of two people who found each other when they needed it most, and who built a life of love and meaning together. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer your hand to someone who is falling and promise to hold on no matter what comes next. And in the end, that is exactly what Benjamin and Florence had done. They had held on to each other through every storm and every challenge, through joy and sorrow, through the mundane moments and the extraordinary ones. They had loved each other fiercely and completely, and they had created something that would outlast them both, a legacy of love that would continue to inspire and guide their family for generations to come. The ranch still stands today, though it has changed and evolved over the years. But the story of Benjamin and Florence remains the same, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, a reminder of what is possible when two people choose love over fear, courage over desperation, and hope over despair. It is a story that began with a woman running from the law and a cowboy who decided to run with her, and it became a love story for the ages, one that proved that sometimes the best adventures begin when you take a chance on someone who seems like trouble and discover that they are actually your destiny.